Ever since ever since Monster Hunter Wilds came out, it's been a game a lot of people's PCs couldn't run, and I've been getting begged to test out certain GPUs like the 9070 XT, 5070 Ti to see which one makes a better upgrade if you're upgrading for this game. In this video, I'm testing out the Asus Prime 5070 Ti at its out-of-the-box stock settings up against the Steel Legend from ASRock for the 9070 XT, again at its out-of-the-box settings. And if you're just trying to max out Monster Hunter Wilds at 4K native resolution with the ray tracing settings to their maximum value, well, neither GPU is doing amazingly well here. The good news is I'll also be testing some reduced settings. Let me go ahead and slide out of the way here a little bit. We can see that the 9070 XT is 5% faster at 46 FPS versus 44, but generally these are just probably not the settings we're really looking for here. Also note, if you're upgrading for this game, that I'm on a 9800X 3D based system to avoid CPU limitations as much as possible. If you're on an older CPU, just upgrading the GPU might not get you the results that we are seeing here. I should also mention how I'm testing this. This is using the built-in benchmark tool you can download for the game, but I've modded it to avoid gaslighting you. The built-in benchmark uses cutscenes that inflate the performance numbers. There's a mod available that cuts out the cutscenes, and I'm just using the most demanding initial section of the gameplay section to be more representative of actual frame rates during gameplay. Now, what am I doing here? I'm now enabling DLSS and FSR at the performance mode, and I'm using the DLSS and FSR that is built directly into the game menu, rather than trying to go into any driver software to override things or use mods or anything like that. I did see FSR 4 available in the menu, and it had a newish version of DLSS 3 available in the menu. And notice I'm not using any frame generation here. Now, some people will be like, you should have gone through the trouble getting the DLSS 4 going, and etc. Well, here's the thing. Honestly, DLSS 4 runs a bit slower, so if you look at performance numbers, DLSS 4 would actually perform slightly worse than what you're seeing here with DLSS 3. What's different is the image quality. But anyway, I'm using what's built into the game because a lot of people aren't going to be going into different software and obscure menu settings and overriding things. The good news is both GPUs are now doing well, but the 9070 XT is doing 69 nice FPS average, whereas the 5070 Ti is less nice at 67. Realistically, it's a pretty equivalent experience, but again, that was kind of interesting given that was with ray tracing enabled, so maybe it's no surprise that if we turn to medium settings and turn ray tracing off, we now see the 9070's XT, which had a lead but kind of an imperceptible one, become at least slightly more perceptible. 8% advantage at 57 FPS versus 53. Notice I've now turned all the upscaling off as well. So this is once again an apples to apples comparison. Just native 4K, but using the medium preset, except notice it says custom up in the benchmark thing. The presets in this game automatically enable upscaling, so when I disable the upscaling, like FSR and DLSS, that is now considered a custom preset. But I selected the medium preset and then disabled any upscaling so that we're running at the native 4K resolution here. And again, both GPUs are actually close to capable of a 60 FPS average here, although do notice that scenes like this, where it's staring out at all the monsters over the horizon here, are dropping closer to that 50 FPS-ish line rather than to the 60 FPS-ish line. And again, I end the average right here as we move into a kind of blank sand, easier section of the benchmark, because again, I want to be capturing more difficult gameplay. I know parts of the actual game can be even more demanding than this, but this is a lot more representative than the actual full benchmark run with those cutscenes, etc. Anyway, what I've done now is I've once again turned on performance mode upscaling, and what we're seeing here is, but with the medium level preset with ray tracing turned off, right? And here we're seeing that the frame rates jump up quite a bit. So 83 FPS versus 80, it's about a 4% lead for the 9070 XT. So really, overall, the performance here is pretty much the same. Also, I'd even say image quality-wise, when I'm looking at the side-by-sides here, FSR 4 and DLSS 3 are pretty competitive with each other. I haven't done a deep frame-by-frame analysis of this particular game, but just looking at them side by side, I'd say they both look pretty good. Might actually feel FSR 4 is slightly sharper in certain instances, but again, if you switch to DLSS 4 through some overrides, etc., you'd get probably a little sharper than FSR 4 at a little bit more of a performance penalty. I'll say that here, because FSR 4 is available, that just really the upscalers aren't something to be afraid of using on either GPU. You're going to have a pretty good experience with both the AMD and the NVIDIA GPU here. Now we're going down to 1440p resolution, which I think is realistically a target that a lot of people would be trying to hit. And we're at max settings again. This is ultra, but native resolution. And then with the ray tracing turned up to its maximum value. And interestingly, again, despite the ray tracing being turned up, not that this game really uses that much, we're at a 12% advantage for the 9070 XT at 73 versus 65. Now, 12% isn't the kind of lead that's going to be like super noticeable if you're not running a frame rate counter, but it's something. It's there. It's definitely beyond the realm of a tie. And it's also higher than what we saw at 4K resolution. So it's looking like as we lower the resolution, the 9070 XT's lead seems to grow. So that's kind of interesting. Again, both GPUs very usable here. This is probably the hardest scene right now in the entire run. The 5070 Ti is just barely dipping under 60 at times, whereas the 9070 XT was usually maintaining over 60, but anybody on a variable refresh rate display, that's not gonna be a big difference. If you're on a 60 FPS locked, non-variable refresh rate display, I might actually suggest using some of your GPU upgrade budget on this high end of a GPU to maybe actually upgrade your monitor as well, or think about that anyway. So if you're buying this expensive a GPU, you're probably on a higher refresh rate and variable refresh rate display. Anyway, if we stick at the max settings, but now we do enable DLSS and FSR, there's a typo here. That's still DLSS 3. I'm sorry here. My head will cover that up. But I am at the balance mode. So for 4K mode, I was being more aggressive and using performance mode upscaling. For 1440p, I think the balanced mode is more appropriate. So that's what I'm using here. And frame rates are doing really well. We're at 90 FPS on the 9070 XT versus 82 on the 5070 Ti. So we've dropped to a 10% lead for the 9070 XT. Again, if this really was using the DLSS 4 override, I would imagine that the 9070 XT would again claw back a little bit more of that lead. Because DLSS 4 would be a little bit more demanding than DLSS 3 to run. Not much, a little bit, a few percent. But again, I think then the DLSS 4 image would be a bit sharper here, etc. Again, that's something you can do, but I'm testing out what is available in the game menus themselves. I have a feeling I'll still get comments about it in the comment section. Whatever. Anyway, yeah. So here we're getting a good experience on both GPUs, maxed out besides upscaling on these on a 1440p display. That being said, if you drop to the medium settings and turn off ray tracing and turn off upscaling, so you want to play at a native 1440p but at a higher refresh rate, going down to the medium settings but native 1440p, no upscaling, the 9870 XT is good for 91 FPS average, which I'm going to say is starting to be noticeable even without a frame rate counter running versus the 77 FPS we're seeing on the 5070 Ti. So remember, moving down to the 1440p resolution, we saw the 9070 XT's lead grow here, but also turning off the ray tracing has, of course, made it grow even more than what we had seen with it turned on. So anyway, I think that explains why we're now seeing an 18% advantage here, which, like I said, I think would be pretty noticeable. In a lot of games, 90 FPS is really kind of my sweet spot. Like, I'm okay at 60. But by the time I'm at 90 in a single-player game, that's really where I think it starts to be kind of diminishing returns past that point, to be honest. Not that it's unnoticeable, but that's really kind of a nice sweet spot there, in my personal opinion. Anyway, so that's what we're looking at here, 18% advantage for the 9070 XT at 1440p medium. But of course, if you want an even higher refresh rate experience, you can also use DLSS and FSR on a medium preset. And see how far you can push the frame rate. So here we're looking at FSR 4 versus DLSS 3 balanced mode. So once again, balanced mode here, no frame generation. And the 9070 XT is good for 111 FPS, putting it 14% faster than the 5070 Ti, which is hitting 97. 1% lows are a similar spread at 12% advantage for the 9070 XT at 93 versus 83. Now, other thoughts on like high frame rates in this game, like I mentioned earlier though, is I am on a 9800X3D based CPU system here. I can't stress enough that as you do things like go down to medium settings and use upscaling, you're relieving the burden on the GPU, which can cause you to hit the limits of your CPU. So if you're running these cards and not seeing these same kind of frame rates at these settings, it's possible that you are CPU limited, and that's one thing to think about if you're planning an upgrade here, right? If you're on an older CPU, this game is very demanding on both that CPU and the GPU. And as you relieve the burden on the GPU, you're more likely to run into those CPU limits. So do keep that in mind. Now, if you are on a 1080p display, but still thinking about upgrading to cards of this power level, this one's over 9,000, guys, 9070 XT. Anyway, we can hit 90 FPS at a maxed out 1080p resolution. That includes the RT high, no upscaling. And the 5070 Ti is good for 78. That gives a 15% advantage to the 9070 XT, even though there is at least some small amount of ray tracing involved here. And the 1% lows are a 6% advantage at 66 versus 62. Now, I do think, a lot of people do have a 1080p display and might be considering upgrading these cards. I do feel like these cards are a bit overkill for 1080p, but not necessarily. It's not like maxing this out gets us at just ridiculously high frame rates where the GPU is going to waste in games as demanding as this one. Monster Hunter Wilds, I don't think has been accused by anybody of being an overly well optimized or easy to run game. Despite the fact that, well, sometimes the visuals can look nice, I don't think it's a particularly striking game given the performance profile that you're seeing. But at least you can see that with cards this powerful, you can power through it. Now, the last thing we'll look at is if you are on a 1080p display and you don't want to upscale, but you do want a higher frame rate, you could try out something like the medium settings. And now we're seeing the 9070 XT moving up to a 20% advantage. So again, we're seeing that trend that as we go to lower and lower rendering resolutions, the advantage for the 9070 XT becomes more and more noticeable. And also as you turn off ray tracing. It still has the advantage with ray tracing enabled, but it has an even more of an advantage with ray tracing turned off. And this is 112 FPS versus 93 average in this scene. The 1% lows are a 15% advantage at 92 versus 80. Once again, a reminder that if you're trying to replicate my benchmark here, I am using the downloadable benchmark tool, but I am not running it in its default default thing. I am using a mod that removes the cutscenes. So it begins at the gameplay section, and then I'm not running the full gameplay section either. As you see, every time I've cut this, that is where I cut the benchmark average off. So as we get through this demanding area with all of the animals on screen and all of the foliage, this right here is where I am ending the test right as we get out of this area. So if you're looking to compare with any of my results, that's where you would do it on your system. Now, overall thoughts on this is that don't take this as like a review of the 9070 XT versus the 5070 Ti. In my testing, when I've tested a wider variety of games, it's more typical to actually see the 5070 Ti a little bit faster. There's definitely games where the 9070 XT is faster. There's games where the 5070 Ti is faster. On average, in my testing and most other people's testing, is that if you're playing a wide variety of games, the 5070 Ti has a little bit of an edge, more noticeable in some games than others, and like I said, but there are games like this one where the 9070 XT, right at these settings, 20% faster, very noticeable. So when you're targeting a build around a particular game, it's often a good idea to research how they perform and what features are available in that particular game. So in this particular game, it does look like the 9070 XT has the edge. Even with ray tracing turned on, even completely maxed out at max settings. And it was also nice to see the FSR 4 available as well. The other thing I guess I'll mention before we go is let's take a look at pricing right now. So worldwide pricing can vary a lot, especially the United States is a little bit crazy right now. But the 5070 Ti, its MSRP is meant to be $750, but I'm not seeing anything available for $750. Looks like the Asus Prime is in stock at $830, and Coincidentally, again, that actually is the exact model that I did test out in the video. By the way, thoughts on this model overall? I really like the Prime model design. I don't like the overly RGB focused gamery looking cards. I like something a little more sleek. So anyway, if you're looking at the cooling and like temperature numbers and things like that on my 5070 Ti, that is that Asus Prime model running at its out of the box settings. If I wanted to buy the 9070 XT, it looks like the lowest price available right now is $800, and I did double check this is actually in stock. Now that's the Power Color Reaper. Looks like the ASRock Steel Legend is $830. The ASRock Steel Legend actually being the physical card that I tested in this video. Now this one does run at the reference specs, like power limit wise and everything like that. So its performance should be comparable to other reference spec cards. Things like the noise or exact temperatures might be affected a little bit by the cooler model. So if you're interested in that, that is that. By the way, I've also really liked the look of this. If you're looking for a white build, I really do think the Steel Legend card looks quite nice in it. Anyway, but that actually means that the two models I compared here were exactly identically priced on the current market at $830. So this is where I would give diverging advice depending on whether you're building your PC in general for general gaming or whether you're building it specifically for this specific game. Because in general, I would say that if a 9070 XT and a 5070 Ti cost the same, for general gaming purposes, I would prefer the 5070 Ti. They have the same amount of VRAM. DLSS 4 tends to be available in more games and look a little bit better than FSR 4. And on average, the 5070 Ti is a few percent faster when not ray tracing, a more noticeable lead when ray tracing, and an even more noticeable lead when doing things like heavy path tracing workloads. That being said, in this particular game, if this is the game that you are upgrading for, I would give the alternate advice, where it does actually appear to be the case that the 9070 XT is generally faster. And especially if you're playing at the lower resolutions rather than 4K, it starts to become a more noticeable advantage. So that's interesting. And that the ray tracing workloads in this game aren't so heavy that they actually end up giving the 5070 Ti the advantage. The 9070 XT loses a bit of its lead compared to when ray tracing is off, but it still continues to have that lead. So that's where, again, I want to make sure you guys understand this video for what it is. If this is buying advice for Monster Hunter Wilds, it does appear like the 9070 XT is the better choice. But if it's general buying advice for gaming, I do still think I would generally recommend the 5070 Ti at the same price. So do keep that in mind. Anyway, if you liked this video, detailed head-to-heads at those settings maxed out versus medium settings using FSR, performance at 4K and balanced at 1440p, and native at 1080p, I have not just tested Monster Hunter Wilds. This is one of 8 games that released in 2025 that I just tested, and expect either other videos about each game, or I may just do a gigantic video with all eight games in it. We'll have to see how I end up structuring it. It'll probably end up being a gigantic video with all 8. We'll see. Anyway, I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.